We throw around the word democracy all the time, and we usually trace it right back to ancient Athens. But what if our modern system is so different from the original that the people who invented it wouldn't even recognize it? That's the big question we're diving into.
It seems like a simple question, right? But the answer is anything but. Were the Athenians just running like democracy version 1.0 and we're on version 10? Or were they running a completely different political operating system altogether? That's what we're here to figure out.
All right, first things first, let's set the scene. We're jumping in our time machine and heading way back to the 5th century BC. This is the golden age of Athens, and trust me, this wasn't just a time of amazing art and deep philosophy. It was a hotbed for some really, really radical political experiments. So picture this. Athens has just pulled off this incredible victory against the Persians, and suddenly they find themselves leading a powerful naval alliance called the Delian League. With all the league's money now flowing into their city, they went on a massive building spree. We're talking the Acropolis. And right in the middle of all this, a visionary leader named Pericles helps them perfect a revolutionary new form of government.
Okay, the absolute beating heart of this whole system was the assembly, or the ecclesia. Now, this wasn't a congress full of elected representatives. No, it was the people. Any citizen could literally just climb up Pnyx Hill, listen to the debates, and cast a direct vote. On everything, from new taxes to declaring war, the power was immediate and it was personal.
So, how did a law actually get passed? Well, the process was amazingly straightforward. Any citizen, yeah, you, could get up and propose a bill. Then, after a good, healthy debate, thousands of your fellow citizens would vote on it. If it passed, it just went to a Council 500 for a final look over. The entire system was designed to keep power flowing right from the people.
And here's where things get really wildly different from our system. For most government jobs, the Athenians didn't hold elections. They used a lottery. To them, elections were just an aristocratic tool that favored the rich and famous. But a lottery? Well, that was the ultimate expression of political equality. Anyone could be called to serve. A perfect example is the powerful Council of 500. Its members were chosen by randomly drawing black and white fava beans. If you drew a white bean, congrats, you were in for the year. This simple random act was meant to stop corruption and make sure it was ordinary citizens, not career politicians, running the show. But that raises a really important question. Who exactly counted as an ordinary citizen? And this is where we hit our first major disconnect, because this rule by the people, well, it came with some pretty significant fine print. When you look into who was actually included, you start to see a world very, very different from our own. When you actually break down the numbers, the picture gets crystal clear. The demos, the people with actual political power, made up at most about 10 to 20% of the population. You had to be an adult male, and both of your parents had to be Athenian. Everyone else, women, foreign residents, and a huge population of enslaved people, was completely locked out of the political process. Women, for instance, might have been citizens in a social sense, but they had absolutely no political rights. Their primary role was in the home. They were barred from the assembly and the law courts. Now, they did have some important religious roles and some legal protections, like being able to initiate a divorce, but the world of politics was completely closed to them. Okay, so even if we set that huge issue of inclusion aside for a moment, we run into an even bigger philosophical divide. The very thing we consider essential to democracy, representation, is something they would have seen as its total opposite. This right here is the core difference. For Athenians, democracy meant the demos, the people, held power directly. They were the ones making the decisions. For us, democracy is about delegating our power to the kratos, the state, through elected representatives. To an Athenian, the whole idea of representation wasn't democratic at all. It was aristocratic. It created a ruling class. For us, it's the entire system. This quote really just cuts right to the heart of it. From their perspective, a system where you hand over your personal political power to someone else for years at a time and just hope they do what you want, well, that wouldn't look like freedom at all. There's this great phrase for it, a self-expropriation of power. Think about it. The very act of electing a representative makes the citizen passive. For the next 4 or 5 years, you have very little direct involvement. You've basically outsourced it.
For an Athenian who was expected to show up and participate constantly, this would have seemed like a complete abandonment of a citizen's most fundamental duty and power. And this whole idea of outsourcing power leads us to a final, fascinating difference: the modern concept of a politician. It's a role we take for granted, but it simply would not have made sense in their system.
So, did Athens even have politicians? The short answer is no, not in the way we understand the term at all. The concept of a professional class of elected decision-makers just didn't exist.
Just think about it. In Athens, a leader gained influence by persuading the assembly in person, not by winning an election for some legislative seat. They could propose ideas, but the people always had the final say. And get this, being paid for your political influence was a criminal offense. Plus, there were no formal political parties to belong to. It's a completely different world.
So instead of professional politicians, Athens had two main types of public figures. First, there were the strategoi, the generals. They were among the few officials who were actually elected, because, hey, military command was seen as a pretty specialized skill. But the most common political actors were the rhetorists, the speakers. A rhetor wasn't an elected official. It was simply any citizen who volunteered to get up and address the assembly. But this wasn't some informal role. It was constitutionally recognized and came with immense responsibility. If a rhetor proposed a law that was later found to be harmful or illegal, they could be put on trial and face severe punishment. Their accountability was direct and it was personal.
So, would the inventors of democracy recognize what we do today? It seems pretty unlikely. They'd see a system that includes far more people, which they might admire. But they would also see a system built on representation, delegation, and professional politicians, ideas that were fundamentally alien, even hostile to their concept of rule by the people. And it leaves us with a final thought. In evolving our democracy for the modern world, what have we gained? And what essential spark of that citizen power might we have lost along the way?